Hello, sentient beings, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Kara, and I make videos about Buddhism and how to apply it into everyday life. So if you're interested, subscribe for more content like this. And without further ado, let's get into the video. Buddhism is a 2,600-year-old religion that's vast and complex, full of many different schools of thought and different traditions. And so when you're just starting out as a beginner, as a newbie, it's understandable that you're probably going to make some mistakes. Here are the top 7 mistakes that I find beginner Buddhists make when they're just starting out. And at the end, I tell you what my biggest mistakes have been and which ones I am still working on as someone who's been a Buddhist their entire life, in case you don't know already. Mistake number 1 is a la carting the Dharma. So I like to think of Buddhism as the least religious religion out there. It's quite unstructured in terms of rules and like what you must do comparably to other religions. There's not one clear path in terms of what you should and shouldn't do because there are so many different schools of thought. So I think this is a misconception because there are clear paths in terms of what you should and shouldn't do. It's not widely taught, and in the West it's kind of been purported as more of like this philosophy and way of life where it's just about meditation and relaxing and finding awareness. And so people usually don't see it as a very structured or understand the principle of Buddhism in that sense. So I think when just starting out, people tend to take the things that resonate with them from Buddhism and then just leave whatever they have trouble with or don't believe in, which is fine when you're just starting out, I think. But eventually, I think to gain any kind of progress or to call yourself a Buddhist, you probably would want to choose a path and follow that path and that one school or that one tradition so that you can make progress and not be confused by all the other different methods of cultivation and ways of doing things. So I find that some of the things that Westerners have a hard time accepting in terms of Buddhist concepts are the Four Noble Truths, which is basically the foundation of Buddhism: suffering, cause of suffering, cessation of suffering, and the way, which I've talked about before. I'll link the video somewhere here, but it's basically the foundation of Buddhism, and you should probably understand it if you are going to either study Buddhism or become a Buddhist, and to understand why that is the foundation and build on top of it. But most people don't even acknowledge it, and they call themselves a Buddhist or they think they know Buddhism. Karma is a big one that people have trouble understanding and accepting. And they go hand in hand because I think a lot of people in the West think is like mysticism to think about rebirth and karma because they can't see it, they can't measure it, so therefore they have trouble believing in it because literally they're like, well, you're telling me to have blind faith that something like this exists, so like I have a lot of trouble doing that. And so karma, and then in relation to that, rebirth, and that you will be reborn into other bodies, other kinds of beings in other realms, is again like something that you can't see and it's hard to prove, and so therefore people often just don't acknowledge it when they talk about Buddhism. But those 3 things, the Four Noble Truths, karma, and rebirth, make up basically the basis for everything that the Buddha talks about. Without that, there's nothing more that you can talk about in Buddhism that really matters, because we are focused on having a good life, like having a good rebirth and ultimately achieve enlightenment. And so if you don't believe in any of these things, then there's no basis for you to progress and just like improve yourself if what you do basically don't matter in the next life, right? I think it's important to not a la carte things eventually when you get past the beginner stage. In the beginning, it's okay to sample different schools of thought and different ways of doing things to see what resonates with you, but eventually you should probably choose choose a path. And yes, even us commitment phobic millennials need to choose a path, because choosing a path is the start of becoming an expert. And a lot of beginners have trouble choosing something to stick with, because that means abandoning all the other things that they could be doing. But that's how you become good at something, is to dedicate a lot of your time to one thing. And so look around, go to different temples, attend different kinds of Buddhist events, see which schools resonate with you, and pick one. The second mistake that beginner Buddhists make is they get distracted by traditions and props. So as you're probably aware, there are so many different objects and props that are used in the Buddhist tradition. The Tibetan singing bowls, prayer beads, meditation cushions, sashes, different kinds of garments, statues of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, incense, just various different things that people actually buy and sell. And there's very elaborate kinds of like metals, precious metals and jewels and gems that make up some of these things. And there are some literal gems that people would buy to like make offerings on their altars and so on. And so there are so many different pretty things that you can buy for yourself, right? And so many people also talk about how beneficial it is to have these things in your home, because they help with your cultivation and probably remind yourself to be more peaceful, remind yourself of the Buddha Dharma. And so like people can become obsessed with it. And especially as a beginner, it's easy to be distracted by all these shiny objects and then not knowing what exactly is the purpose of them. In essence though, all these things don't really matter in the grand scheme of things, because if you think about all the ascetics and all the masters who've cultivated in the mountains, in the caves, they don't have any of these things. All they have is maybe a simple garment and then a place to sit on, and then they just literally meditate. So all you need is your own peaceful self and mind to cultivate, really. All the other things, they're just representations and reminders for what's ultimately true. So this is an analogy that's been told to me. If you are, say, someone who is teaching the Dharma, you will be a person who is trying to point people towards the right direction, right? And so like they'll be pointing to the moon. And so say the moon is the actual representation of enlightenment. They're just pointing there. They're trying to tell you like, hey, look at the moon, aim towards the moon right there. But people look at the person instead and look at their finger and say like, oh, this finger is the ultimate representation of Dharma or of enlightenment. And so they worship the finger instead of worshiping the moon. And so they kind of have their focus all wrong and not really seeing the point of the finger. And so that's what these objects could do to people if you don't know what they actually represent. So essentially all these objects play a similar role in that they're only representations of what's ultimately true, but they're not the source of ultimate happiness and enlightenment themselves. So if you have a Tibetan singing bowl and it makes like a really nice sound when you hit it, the bowl itself, although it kind of brings you peace and calmness by listening to it, it's not going to get you to enlightenment. It's a tool. All of them are tools to help remind you to find peace, to, stay on track, to stay disciplined. They all mean different things, and I might make a video about each of them. So comment below if you're interested in learning more about what each of those objects represent, but they're just there to assist you in your cultivation. The third mistake that I see a lot of beginners make is that they just blindly follow whatever teacher or teaching they come across. When you're just starting out, and this applies to literally any kind of discipline, but especially to a spiritual one, is you don't know right from wrong. You don't know how to judge a teacher for her credentials and experience and whether they have your best interest in mind. And so what happens is the first teacher that they come across who is kind to them, who seems persuasive or charismatic, they would just start following them very loyally, because a lot of these people are hungry to find spiritual fulfillment, to gain knowledge in that particular area. And so when they find someone who seemingly have more knowledge than them, they're very eager to become a student of that person. And so this can become quite dangerous. If you look at a lot of cults, they have very charismatic, smart, knowledgeable leaders who definitely don't have their students' best interests in mind. One of the best documentaries I've ever seen, Wild Wild Country, about the Rajneeshis, I feel like is a great example. Can't speak to the legitimacy of the teachings because I haven't spent a lot of time listening to the leader of the Rajneeshis, but there's a list of criteria that you should evaluate the teacher on before you just dive all in and become a loyal follower. And luckily for us, there is literally a list of criteria that we as Buddhists should follow, a checklist, if you will, to evaluate your potential teacher against. And so this is like a great way to make sure that the person that you are relying upon is a reliable person who can help you progress on the spiritual path. And so this actually comes from the Lamrim, or it's a long title, but it's called The Great Treatise on the Stages of the Path to Enlightenment. So again, this is another term for Lamrim, but the book that I have looks like this, and this is the version published by Snow Lion. And again, this is by Tsongkhapa, who originally wrote the original Lamrim. And so the part that talks about the characteristics of the teacher to be relied upon is in chapter 4. So the quote reads, "Rely on a Mahayana teacher who is disciplined, serene, thoroughly pacified, has good qualities surpassing those of the students, is energetic, has a wealth of scriptural knowledge, possesses loving concern, has thorough knowledge of reality and skill in instructing disciples, and has abandoned dispiritedness." So it talks about these 10 qualities that a teacher must have before you start relying on him or her. And it goes on to elaborate on what each of those 10 that was just listed means, and how you can observe your teacher to make sure that he or she has these qualities. And so I recommend picking this up. I'll link it in the description below. It has 3 volumes, but it basically covers the entire path from 0 to 100, from having no knowledge as a beginner all the way to enlightenment, if you just follow exactly what it says. And so I think the Lamrim is so valuable. I might make videos on them in the future. I think I definitely will, but it's just I need to find ways to organize all the knowledge in here in a way that is digestible and not too long. So in conclusion, you can find teachers who have your best interest in mind, who can be relied upon and meets those criterias. And so just be wary when you are coming across something new, especially as a beginner, and make sure to, get a second opinion from those that you trust, and even better, those who have been a practicing Buddhist for a longer period of time than you, to make sure that you are safe and that you have people around you who are able to support you on the spiritual path. The fourth mistake that I see a lot of beginners make is they see Buddhism as a way to get what they want in life. Most certainly start to see good fortune and good karma as you make progress on the spiritual path and cultivation. So you gain a lot of merit from meditating, from being generous, from helping others. And so you will start to see an improvement in your life. And a lot of people think that maybe this is the point of Buddhism, is to have good karma karma from being a Buddhist, which as a beginner, that might be something that attracted you to Buddhism in the first place. Even if it's not material, then maybe even spiritual peace and just the stillness that comes from meditation, which in and of itself obviously is not a bad thing, but it's also just temporary, it's impermanent. So I see this very often in Asian countries, and back in Taiwan where I grew up, there are a lot of temples where people go to pray for good health, a lot of money, pray for a son or a daughter, or having good test scores, and just these like worldly things that they hope to gain. And they think, you know, by offering more money, they have a higher chance of getting what they want, or by adding more incense to the burner, they'll also have a higher likelihood to achieve what they want. So a lot of people carry that mentality to Buddhism as well, you know, like a money tree. Like, how can I get what I want in life from this vehicle, from this system? I think it's fine in the beginning if you are attracted to that, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. It's quite understandable, but that's not per se the point of Buddhism, because once you do get what you want, you will eventually lose it, whether it's in this life or when you die, because you can't take any of these things with you. And so what Buddhism is concerned with is the bigger picture of your consciousness itself. When you die, your consciousness lives on in a sense, and so where does it go? Your karma that you have accumulated in this life will determine where you go in your next life, and it's hard to have control over that if you haven't consciously worked on yourself and worked on accumulating good merit and karma. And so that's quite scary, right? And you might not even be in contact with Buddhism in your next life to be on the path again towards enlightenment. And so we want to get out of this cycle of rebirth, right? And achieve enlightenment and nirvana. So that's the bigger picture. That is the ultimate goal. But if you feel like you're not there yet, you're not quite feeling like you have the need to want to get out of samsara or see the point of enlightenment, but you're still interested in Buddhism, why not? You can certainly have literally anything that you want in life from the merit that you can accumulate from being a good person. And I think as long as you start to slowly understand the point of why the things, the material things that you have isn't going to bring you ultimate happiness, then that is enough to start planting the seed for realizing ultimate wisdom. And that, you know, is all that we can ask for of ourselves, especially when just starting out. The fifth mistake that I see a lot of people who are starting out in Buddhism make is they seek sensations and peace in meditations. So meditation obviously is not a bad thing. However, the attachment to certain feelings and state of mind that comes from it might not be beneficial and sometimes even dangerous. So this is quite common among Zen practitioners and Westerners, because a lot of the focus is on meditation, is on finding peace of mind and awareness and mindfulness. So meditation is a great tool, and I think a lot of people, because they meditate and they read like books like The Power of Now, that they think maybe that is the main point of Buddhism, is to live in every moment and to just find peace, and eventually you'll gain enlightenment by doing that enough, which you could technically, according to some Zen schools, is you find enlightenment in the gaps in the moments. But it's quite hard, at least like I hear from the commentaries, for the modern person to be able to achieve that, unless you basically leave modern life behind and go practice in the mountains or somewhere remote. It's quite hard to do so. But I think what I want to cover here is that there are a lot of people doing transcendental meditation, and that's become quite popular. Like I hear Tim Ferriss talking about it. He was talking to Jerry Seinfeld in one of the episodes, and Jerry apparently does it as well. And I know so many successful top performers do it, and therefore spreading the popularity of it, I think it's fine. If it helps people, then great. But there is this thing called the 50 skanda demons that's part of the Shuragama Sutra. And so this is the sutra that basically talks about the different states that you should be aware of when you're progressing higher in your cultivation and meditation, and the pitfalls that you should avoid when you get there. Because a lot of people could get arrogant, they think they've made it, they've become a sage or achieved enlightenment when they haven't, and that sudden appearance or that thought of ego and of being better than other people would all of a sudden, like, they would be captured by one of the skanda demons, basically, in terms of they'll be hindered by their ego in a lot of ways through their attachment to whatever state of mind they have achieved. And so let me elaborate. So the Shuragama Sutra is quite long, and just to give you a summary of what the Shuragama Sutra is about, it is a comprehensive Mahayana Buddhist guidebook that leads readers to spiritual enlightenment along a path described in Shakyamuni Buddha's most advanced teachings. It details at some length the understandings, practices, and pitfalls aspiring bodhisattvas must be conscious of in walking the path. And so it's a really good guidebook, and I think what's important to cover here is that at the very end in volume 8, it talks about the 5 skandhas and the skandha demons. So there are 10 demons per skandha, so 5 skandhas make up 50 skandha demons. So the 5 skandhas are form, feeling, thinking, formations, and consciousness. And so they represent different states of mind that you can achieve as you go into higher states of meditation. So some people have visions, some people could have out-of-body experiences, they could go through walls, they could, do all these things that a lot of people think only enlightened people or people with special powers can do. And so when you get to these states, it can become especially dangerous because you could think you're enlightened or achieve some kind of special state, and therefore you're better than everyone else, or thinking you're a sage. So it talks about the demonic states a cultivator may fall into by becoming attached or arrogant about spiritual powers. It's also explained in the Shuragama Sutra, the last volume, in terms of the exact kind of states you should look out for and how you should not be attached to it and just let it go. Like, just let it go, whatever miraculous vision or feelings or things that you can do. Because if you get attached to that, that could present a hindrance to you and your progress towards cultivation and making progress towards something that is the ultimate goal versus this, being like super cool and all, but like not where you want to stay. How does this relate to what we're talking about? Well, with transcendental meditation, the biggest thing that people like about transcendental meditation is the sensations and the different visions, different feelings that you have when you're doing TM. And although I haven't done TM, I feel like I've gotten to a similar state of what people talk about in there, because you can also very easily achieve that in Buddhism through various methods. And I think a lot of Westerners don't realize some of the dangers associated with that, and how these different states of mind could make you attached to them. And the arrogance could really keep you in seeking those sensations again. So yeah, I think in conclusion, just be careful of the states of mind that you're in while you're in meditation. And also that meditation and finding peace in the moment, although it's nice, it isn't ultimately the point of Buddhism. Because if you're, say, feeling angry or you're suffering and you're meditating to avoid it, sometimes meditation can become a distraction. And so just, again, meditation is a tool and use it mindfully, but also balance it out with studies of Buddhism, of acquiring knowledge, of actual practice with the real world and interacting others and dealing with the messiness of life, like that's how you can ultimately incorporate all that you learn, all the mindfulness that you've gained from meditation into practical application and benefiting others. So yeah, the sixth mistake that I see a lot of people make as a beginner is they see Buddhism as a philosophy and not a way of life. This is probably the most common mistake that I see people make. It's not so much a mistake as much as it is the person's propensity towards intellectualizing instead of actually taking action. There's something about thinking about theories and principles in your head and debating about them that makes it very safe, and that you don't have to actually be proven wrong because they're literally just ideas that you read and they're not even your ideas, so you can kind of hide behind them as you're talking to people or debating about them. And so you're not really truly gaining wisdom or experience because you're not applying them in real life. This is really common and understandable because there are so much knowledge out there, sutras in classes, in different teachers and teachings, that when you're just starting out especially, your head probably wants to explode because there's just like so much to learn, so many different schools, and you're like, where the heck do I start? How do I learn this? What do I learn? And in the beginning, one can fall into like just a lot of theories and principles and just like very heady. And so in the beginning, that's definitely understandable as you're trying to kind of balance out the seesaw of knowledge and application. But I think it becomes worrisome when you're, years into being a Buddhist, but you're still kind of acting like a professor about it, where you're just like, you love to talk about it, you love to learn it, you can list off all the different facts and figures and like the sutra meanings and like you're really good at memorizing and talking about it. But if you're not using it on yourself to improve yourself, to benefit others, and you see that person, although knowledgeable, they're still, quick to anger, they gossip, they are rude, impatient, you're not really using Buddhism in your life and on yourself, and so it's almost irrelevant what you're talking about, however much you know, because the ultimate point is to improve your life. And so just know that, I heard this quote once, I think from Chris Williamson's podcast, is, does it grow corn? So whatever you learn, whether it's Buddhism or not, think about whether that knowledge grows corn, which means, does it have actual benefit and application in real life? So the only way to know that, though, is by actually using it. And that looks different for everybody, and not every theory could grow corn for every person. So that's why there are so many different Dharma doors from the Buddha for each kind of individual with different preferences, different beliefs, and different personalities. So just remember to always apply and learn and use Buddhism to improve yourself and balance the wisdom and knowledge with using it in your life always. The number 7 mistake that I see a lot of beginners make is spiritual materialism. I will say this is a mistake that even a lot of long-term practitioners make and are actively trying to fight off, is that feeling of using spirituality as a way of boosting our own ego or identity. It could almost be like a thing that you brag to people about at dinner tables, and that could also become dangerous because you're attached to the religion itself as a way of, elevating your own ego. So it's not good, obviously, but it's also understandable, whether you're starting out or been practicing a long time, of, being proud of yourself and how much you've learned, how far you've come. And you might have even heard from other people how envious they are of you, or how proud they are of you, of just like how much you know, and maybe even how much you've helped people if you taught classes, meditation classes, retreats, things like that. And so maybe you start to get a little glimmer of like, hey, I think I'm I think I'm not bad. I'm actually pretty good at this. So, that's where you'll need to be very self-aware of your thinking and stave off those kinds of thoughts. I'm not going to use my identity as a Buddhist to boost my own self-esteem. Like, this is part of the work of being a Buddhist, is to have humility and attribute all the good things that you have to other people, to the texts, to your mentors, to your friends, to the environment, to the Buddhist temples. Like, literally nothing that you have gained, whether it's skills or knowledge or, eloquence and smarts, that you gained yourself. Like, you have the support of so many people, so many living beings, that you are indebted to them, that you will not have any of this, not even your body, because your body came from your parents. You won't have anything without the support of living beings. And that's the way that you should think, because ego can only prevent you and hinder you in terms of cultivation, in terms of helping others, and it really limits and stifles you. So just think of it like that. So, spiritual materialism is described like a golden chain around your neck, and you just carry it around and it weighs you down. It's a very easy trap to fall into, especially when you're advanced, because you've accumulated so much knowledge and experience, and you talk to other people who are not as experienced, and then they kind of look at you in awe and amazement, and they ask you a lot of questions, and so it definitely makes you feel good, right? And you start to associate yourself as this senior person who can give guidance, and maybe you start to condescend on some other people who are not as good. Be aware of that, and be aware of when you're showing off your own spiritual practice and knowledge, and always speak for the benefit of other people and not, for yourself, and just be aware of your intentions. And finally, I want to talk about the mistakes that I've made and the things that I'm still working on to this day. So in the past, I've definitely made mistake number 3 in terms of just blindly following teachers and teachings. I think I've learned a lot from every one of the teachers that I followed, and they're just masters that would come through to our home, to our temple, because my parents, they and my aunt, they run a temple in Iowa called the Pure Land of Iowa. And so a lot of Buddhist masters would come through there, and I would interact with them. And back then I would do the Chinese and English translations, and so I worked closely with them, and as a result of being a translator, also absorbed a lot of the teachings and became close to the teachers in that way. And so I think just by proximity, I felt close to their teachings and them as a person, but I didn't really take the time to evaluate them to see if they would have the time to dedicate to help me, and that they're reliable and consistent, and that they have my best interest in mind, which I think is obviously very important. And I think all of them had my best interest in mind, but not all of them were viable in terms of geographically where they lived, because a lot of them lived in Asia, and so it's hard to communicate that way. And in terms of what they teach, some of them are not aligned with, say, Mahayana, and just the things that I've been trying to learn and becoming a bodhisattva, for example. So it comes from experience, it comes from you learning what you can first, and I think that will definitely help you inform the kind of teachings that you would like to learn and the kind of teachers that would benefit you. In the past, I've also made the mistake of number 4, which is praying for good fortune or getting my way in life from Buddhism. I used to do the law of attraction kind of thing, and I would recite sutras to get rid of karmas, to then have better things come to me as a result of getting rid of bad karma. And it works. It truly works. I recite the Earth Door Sutra right here, and it's a very powerful sutra in terms of removing obstructions and bad karma. It's like an hour long, and so, you know, it just takes dedication. But I think when you get past that, you want to look for something bigger, because there's just like so much more that you can get, not to mention, you know, understanding impermanence of worldly material things and knowing like there's something better, more permanent out there. So yeah, I definitely made that mistake as well. Currently, I'm working on being less intellectual. Mistake number 6 about my own practice, because I can be very heady and not do much of the heart practice as I do head practice. And so I'm really good at verbalizing and intellectualizing the things that I hear. And seemingly, I seem to understand a lot, but I need to be better about practical application of growing corn out of what I've learned and practicing from the heart, having compassion for living beings from the heart, of being in the moment, of generosity, of, you know, feeling and understanding the karma, of the dharma from your gut, from your being. And I think that definitely takes practice. That's where I've gained the most benefit from Buddhism, is those practical applications. So definitely number 6. Number 7, the last one, I definitely have spiritual materialism is one of the things that I constantly struggle with, because a lot of people like to ask me questions and I think I give a pretty good comprehensive answer. And I think as a result of getting praise from that and getting attention from that, I start to associate myself with that identity of being a knowledgeable Buddhist and someone who can, you know, lead others. And I'm trying to be humble about it, because I'm trying, you know, I'm trying to follow my own advice and be humble and just let it all go. You know, there's nothing really to be proud of at the end of the day. I think it's healthy to encourage yourself, to give yourself a pat on the back for making progress and for working so hard, because you yourself is still a living being that you should show compassion and encouragement to, like a little child. So you don't want to be too harsh on yourself, but at the same time, like, just watch, at least I try to watch my ego carefully to make sure that it's not inflated and that I'm not looking down upon others or judging others harshly. Yeah, that everything is to others' benefit, really. And that's what I set out to do with this channel, is to educate people who are interested in Buddhism and to show that Buddhism can be applied to your everyday life and that it's still relevant, it's still beneficial, and it has benefited me, and it can for you as well. So these are the 7 mistakes that I've seen a lot of beginner Buddhists make. Hope this was somewhat beneficial in terms of helping you recognize maybe some of the mistakes that you're making. Like I said, I certainly am making a lot of them, have made a lot of them, are making a lot of them, and I have to constantly remind myself and reflect and introspect to make sure that I don't fall into these pitfalls. And that's what cultivation is all about, is constant self-improvement. And also give yourself grace and compassion along the way, because the path to enlightenment is a long one, and we're all here to learn. So if you want to continue your learning of Buddhism, watch this next video, and remember to train your monkey mind and be a master of yourself.